This is the Contender's Edge podcast, where ideas challenge institutions and underdogs rise to lead in construction.
Hello, everyone. This is Vinay here, Head of Customer Experience here at SmartBuild, and welcome to Contender's Edge. Today, I have with us Robert Sheesley. He's the Blue-Collar CIO, fractional CIO, and interim CIO in some cases, to many customers that are in blue-collar industries, which is inclusive of construction. Every once in a while, we like to get some folks that come across from other industries to come and talk to our customers, to give them perspectives on how they can think about their strategy here in the construction industry. And so when Robert and I first met, I thought it would be great to have him on the call. So Robert, why don't you just give us a little bit of your backstory and how you got to become the blue-collar CIO?
Yes, thank you, Vinay. It's great to see you again, and I appreciate the time to talk about technology and how it's going to be and has been applicable in construction and blue-collar trades. So my journey was not a direct line. It was a crooked path, so to speak. I decided to go to grad school and join the Marine Corps Reserve after undergrad. And I developed a man crush on this guy named Ross Perot. And so I interviewed for a job at Electronic Data Systems. I was not a technologist. I grew up in a very rural environment, a blue-collar community in Appalachia, Pennsylvania. I played baseball and I was relatively good, so I got a scholarship, and that's how I ended up in college. And but yeah, a lot of formative years at Electronic Data Systems, the first 7 years of my career, learning how to code and learning not only the technology side of business, but the business side and the technology user challenges that the technology user faces as organizations roll out technology and you define, a technology ecosystem to help business processes, to help the business model evolve. But at the end of the day, no matter what technology, and I used to teach business architecture at State Farm back in 2005, Wendy Keene and I collaborated on rolling out something called business architecture to the State Farm enterprise. I always said it doesn't matter if you're using an Abacus, a Commodore 64, I'm showing my age, a mainframe computer or cloud computing. It's not about the technology. It's about the people and their understanding and the adoption of the use of the technology to make things more efficient, to help the field worker complete the job that he or she has been assigned with as little friction as possible.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Contender's Edge podcast by SmartBuild. I have back with us again Robert Sheesley for part 2 of a discussion that we didn't get to finish fully, and so we decided to come back again and do a part 2. Robert Sheesley, why don't you just kind of a little bit of background on you, just for the folks that didn't listen to the first episode?
Certainly, yeah. Robert Sheesley. I am currently a fractional CIO working with a number of clients in the United States. And prior to that, I was the Chief Information Officer with Wrench Group, which is a home services consolidator of over 30 brands in 14 geographies in the United States. And prior to that, I had a long history of consulting experiences with Anderson Consulting, Alvarez and Marcel, West Monroe Partners, and Triton Value Creation.
Love it. Yeah, no. And for those of you that want to get the backstory on Robert and some of his perspectives from other industries, you can tune into the previous episode. But today we wanted to zoom in on a few topics that came up that we didn't get to fully explore. And I think one of them is really the concept of adoption, right, in the construction industry. And I always like to get folks like yourself that have cross-industry experience, but also have deep experience in the blue-collar workforce, which is a construction workforce it predominantly is, and really talk about some of the things that have worked for you to ensure adoption. That's the thing that we hear a lot the most from our customers. It's not the software, it's the people. They're not adopting the software, right? And these people are not sitting in front of their desks, so they're not used to working in a software tool all the time, right? And so what are some of the observations you've seen from your experience, just trying to get that blue collar workforce buy-in from your teams?
Yeah, I'd like to say that I started my career out in construction because as a 19-year-old young person, I was hired to be a laborer to help build condos on Rehoboth Beach outside of Ocean City, Maryland. And I grew up in a blue collar community in a very rural area of Western Pennsylvania. We like to affectionately refer to it as Appalachia. And so my father spent 30 years as a coal miner. And so I grew up surrounded by blue collar friends, relatives, neighbors. And so as I progressed in my career and I started to do some work in home services and construction and other industry verticals that didn't have the behind the desk employee as the majority workforce, I started to really try to understand and apply the idea of show me. It's the old what's in it for me. Where's the why? And I think leading with that, especially with field services employees in construction, home services, pick a sub vertical of that vertical. I think you're going to get a lot more stickiness as it relates to their want for more and their want to use what you're bringing to them in the area of systems, in the area of reporting. Give them time back on their calendar. We actually just had an HVAC tech in our home this morning because we had a little bit of a glitch with the pump on one of our AC units. And I had a great conversation with him about the system that I know that he's using in the organization that he's a part of. And much younger persons are probably a little bit more grew up with the digital, economy, the digital devices. But I think to the degree that you can begin with that why, when you introduce technology to the blue collar workforce, that is a great starting point.
The why. And so once you kind of frame the why and what's in it for me, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, how do you actually kick these projects off? Like, how do you get them engaged in the beginning and get them, playing with the tool? Like, what are some typical things?
You almost, I think you have to have a marketing hat that you can wear. And what I mean by that is you almost have to market the value proposition around what it is you're introducing. And I've been in leadership programs that talk about marketing IT. You have to be, as a CIO, as a leader, you have to be in a position to market IT because the value that the technology that is being introduced in the organization, the value that it delivers isn't always obvious. If you can, as you kick off these projects, make sure that you're thinking or looking at things through a marketing lens and trying to message, communicate. This whole idea of organizational change navigation is something that I started to think a lot about back when I was at Electronic Data Systems and I went through the EDS leadership internship, and we had some very notable authors and global experts on certain areas, including Peter Senge and Stephen Covey would present to us. And I remember one session in particular when Peter Senge was presenting. The psychology of change is what the title of the 1-month study was. And it talked a lot about the change acceptance curve and some of the things that you can do early on in the area of messaging and communication and immersion of influencers. So finding those people in the workforce that are influencers of others, mapping that influence network, actually going to the trouble of mapping that influence network, and then finding those influencers that you can make them a part of your marketing campaign relative to the change that you're introducing to the organization. And it's well documented throughout the last 4 or 5 decades, 6 decades, where technology has been introduced to the workforce. Organizational change management, or what I like to refer to as organizational change navigation, is something that you need to think about from the word go, really.
Yeah. Interesting. The marketing of IT, stakeholder mapping, it sounds like a very, business development type motion, but it's like you're saying as an IT leader, particularly in the blue collar workforce, this is what's required, right? And so when you think about marketing IT, what are some concrete examples? Like, have you put posters up? Like what type of things you're thinking about here when you say marketing IT?
Yeah. I mean, in the before hybrid work world or remote work world, posters were one of the techniques that would be valuable, especially if it was very visually appealing. I think other things that you can do in this new world where we're not always in the same room together, I think holding town halls, virtual town halls, is one technique that I can be very valuable, especially if you can get, as I mentioned, people from the workforce that can join you in a virtual town hall to talk about their perspective of the introduction of the new technology. Now you got to bring them into the project, if you will, because otherwise they wouldn't have insight or observability of what that new technology is. And then you can provide incentives to people to provide the time necessary to get involved in that manner. I think another area related to techniques used for marketing IT or marketing new technology that's going to be introduced to the workforce is, making sure that you have a place where people can go to get information and provide feedback once you roll out a pilot, or if you're going to roll out the technology in waves versus a big, you can have some portal or some, in a perfect world, intranet dashboard or space where people can go to just not only get information about the technology and the processes that are going to be impacted and revisit the training that was provided, but they can also give feedback. There's got to be a two-way feedback mechanism because you want that feedback both positive and negative. If you can't get that feedback, both positive and negative, then you can't be in a good position to respond with the next best action related to your desire and want to have adoption of the technology, adoption and use.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think that's some of the stuff that we're experimenting with. We're even making signage for site signage to get people to remember to to log their safety incidences in the app, and like kind of traditional marketing techniques. But I like the idea of the town hall, kind of making that part of the motion. Just like thinking about like marketing a product to an external customer. I think that's a really good message in general.
Yeah, and I think reporting successes is important too, especially if you're talking about giving the field worker, the field workforce time back, which is a huge value proposition, to the degree that you can report accurate outcomes on that and have some endorsements, right?
Poster channels.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. It's the same thing. You do testimonials, right?
Testimonials, that was the word. Yeah, it was. That was what I was thinking.
Oh, amazing. So I think the measurability and like kind of using that in your campaign, like I almost like when you say the word IT is marketing, I kind of look at it like a marketing campaign. That's the world. And so you're kind of building these campaigns. You're looking at your influencers and looking at who can drive a lot of endorsement into the program, and communicating results and creating these poster childs and testimonials are all tactics that you'd recommend in this particular setting.
Yes. And I think getting some of the leadership on board earlier, especially if they've had a history of being uninterested or maybe a history of not being fully on board in past endeavors, making sure that you're kind of leaning on your own sword as the CIO or whoever's leading the program, and uh, setting your ego aside, demonstrating a little bit of humility, and trying to get some of the leadership that may be more difficult to win over on board earlier, so that you're not encountering along the way any negative influences that could hijack the success of the implementation.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And so we talked about just like the campaigning, to kind of get these pilots off the ground and getting mass adoption and et cetera, et cetera. But one thing I hear a lot about is just the idea of creating like a culture around it, a culture around a passion around putting data into the system and adopting technology. From your time in the wrench group and other places where you are dealing with big blue cars, like workforces, what were some of the more longer term? I get the campaigns for short term, but for the longer term, how do you going to inculcate that kind of culture?
So I think one of the areas that I've seen the most success is if you bake strategies, culture evolution, culture maturity strategies into your overall strategy of your organization. I'm a big fan of Kaplan and Norton because it leads you down a path of creating strategic objectives based on financial outcomes, customer outcomes, operational internal process outcomes and people outcomes. And I think to the degree that you can bake into those strategic objectives, the change or the curation you want to see in your own culture as it relates to their willingness to adopt technology and adopt really any change that leadership believes is appropriate and will win the day as it relates to value creation. And then make that part of your, if it's part of your strategic objectives of the organization, make it part of it as a part of your individual performance objectives. So that you see that linear line of sight between how I'm being assessed from a performance perspective as an employee and that strategic objective that includes the curation of culture, right? And then everybody is rowing in the same direction as it relates to the want of the build of that culture of curiosity, culture of willingness to lean in to change.
Quality or an attribute in the performance management system, assuming that they have a performance management system. I think a lot of the folks that we're dealing with sometimes that might be something they got to go do first. Before they can culture, right?
Yeah, and you don't need to boil the ocean here. I mean, you can spin up, if you don't already have, a performance management system that ties those strategic objectives and performance objectives. It's not as heavy of a lift as I think people think it is. And I would encourage, all organizations, not just those that have a blue collar workforce, but definitely those that have a blue collar workforce, to have that foundational performance objectives. It can't just be all about specific quantifiable KPIs. There's got to be some element of, are you with us? Are you behaving in ways that support our cultural strategic objectives and our core values?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. No, that's good. I mean, and that's one of the things our folks struggle with a lot. And so this has been very informative, right? It's like, okay, hey, on the one front and the one step, it's like the short term. How do we get that adoption right away? And I think the message around IT is marketing, building campaigns, building an affiliate network, of influencers, whether that be people on staff that are more tech savvy than the others, or whether that be, other, partners, or, I guess you say just influencers, people that influence your people, and build a campaign around that. And you keep doing these campaigns over time. It creates a certain behavior that just becomes normal, right? I guess that's one. And I guess the embedding within the overall performance management, conversation with managers have with their employees about expectations and giving them bonuses or whatever the case may be based on behavior that they want to reward is the how to create a culture around it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think, you see a lot of this, in all industries, best places to work in 2025 and 2024. Well, I think you have to consistently examine the why behind that, right? So it's great to get these accolades, but why are we the best place to work? What are we doing that gets us to that award, this year, last year, year before? And are we doing all the things that we need to do from a cultural maturation perspective to continue to be viewed as one of the favored employees in a particular city or market? And I think to the degree that you are able to continually communicate the why behind that, that also too builds that culture of all in, and I do think that whole leadership endorsement piece of this, because certainly leaders in the organization have more informal influence than others, and getting those folks on board, I think is really important. Use the word testimonial. I think that's spot on.
Yeah, get the testimonials, like the poster outs. Yeah, no, it's amazing. There's a lot of things to think about here, and I think the construction industry, I think, have always been perceived as the laggards on adoption. I think with the AI, really coming alive right now, they have a real opportunity to jump on and leapfrog from being behind to being ahead. So I think getting perspectives from you around some of the best practices of driving adoption was really helpful. And as you build out the blue-collar CIO, I guess you'd say narrative, would love to continue to check in with you to see what you're learning as you're seeing success stories in your clients and when you sit on the boards of these companies. Would love to circle back and keep getting updates on how that's going.
Yeah, I would love to continue the conversation. I mean, I think I mentioned I was at University of Michigan last week, finishing up my CDAIO class, and getting perspectives from a lot of representatives of different industries in that class was so valuable to me because we learn from each other, and we have these conversations, and one of the big, I think, benefits of that is the learning that you can take away from that. Because I'll think about some of the things that we talked about in our previous call and on this one. And, I'll either write about it or, I'll include it into a future state plan that I may create or that I may help others create. And so I'm all in if you want to have future conversations regarding this. And I'm all in on sharing anything that I realize or experience between now and then.
Amazing. No, thanks so much, Robert. I know we're at time for today. This is part 2 of a 2-part series, but always appreciate your insights. And thanks everyone for listening in to Contender's Edge.
Thanks, Vinay.
Thank you.